I would like to welcome you to the Camerawork Gallery, and I appreciate your being here and your support of the gallery and your ongoing support of all the amazing photographers that we exhibit here on a monthly basis. We're very delighted to have Austin's amazing work, and he's got all kinds of engaging stories to share. And once we're through, there will be a reception out in the gallery area, and there's an art information table there that has some little index cards on it and a comments box. We love having you write down the little words about how wonderful you thought the show was, or how wonderful you like his work. And he has some books out there that are a real good bargain, 20 bucks a pop. So I'd like to introduce Austin.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks. Let's see if this works. How's that? Oh, that's strange. Welcome to my last presentation. I realize I'm always saying that, but this time I mean it. I realize I'm always saying that too, but this time I really mean it. These things are hard for me. I'm an introverted person. I like people, but mostly it's from a distance, or on a good day, one-on-one. Aside from my immediate family, I live in a kind of bubble. I make my own air. I put myself in the world through my pictures. I dispatch them. They're like my representatives, my diplomats abroad. It's hard to leave the safety of the castle. I gave a talk at the Portland Art Museum a few years ago, and I was so nervous that just before I was supposed to start, I darted out into the hallway to try and gather my courage. There was a collection of old stone statues, spotlit in their niches, and I tried to center myself by focusing on them, but they were missing limbs and heads, and this served only to accentuate my quickly rising terror. I was doomed. There was an exit sign, and it glowed so enticingly that it took all I had to keep from bursting out and fleeing down the street. I didn't flee, but walking into that auditorium felt like going to an execution, my own. Midway through the talk, my hands went completely numb, and I realized that I'd forgotten how to breathe. I was sure I was going to faint. So yes, these things are hard. But that isn't to say that I'm not grateful for your being here, because I am, very much so. I've often said that photography for me is a way to connect with people across the abyss so that we aren't strangers anymore, but friends. Thank you, my friends, for coming. I'd also like to thank the Camerawork Gallery for having me. I understand that Camerawork is the oldest continuously operating fine art gallery in the United States, founded in 1970 through the encouragement of Minor White. When I learned these facts, they felt serendipitous to me, as I too was founded in 1970, and also because Minor White is a photographer hero of mine. I have a giant book about the history of photography, and White is featured prominently in a chapter called Beyond Reality, the Subjective Vision, along with people like Aaron Siskin, Frederick Sommer, Manuel Alvarez Bravo, Wynn Bullock, and Bresai, all photographers with whom I can relate. These are the brethren I never met. So I feel honored and fortunate to be here. I'd like to offer a special thanks to curator Ken Hawkins, a photographer I admire and who I'm proud to call a friend, and Sharon O'Keefe, the director of Camerawork, who demonstrated great kindness and patience in dealing with my many obsessive and diva-like emails sent in the middle of the night. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Paul Cunningham of the Cunningham Press. Paul couldn't be here today, but he collaborated with me to make the platinum prints for this show, as well as helped me hang them last night. I'd like to thank my mom for giving me life, and also for being willing to take the bus here today to hear me talk, even though she's heard it all before. And finally, I'd like to thank my wife and children who helped keep me grounded, and also who volunteered to put together the spread of food and drinks that will be your reward for sitting through this. Again, a sincere thank you to all. Now let us set sail. I think at this point, most of you are familiar with my story, such as it is. For those who are not, I was born, as I mentioned, in 1970 in San Francisco. I grew up there in the Bay Area. I had some struggles as a teenager, as many do, and at 18, as a way to reset my life, I joined the Navy. I spent the next 4 years living on board the aircraft carrier Independence. And while I wouldn't take that experience back for anything, by the time my stint was up, I was ready to do the most opposite thing I could think of, which it turned out was to study philosophy and religion at UC Santa Cruz. It was there that I started to first photograph in earnest. Looking back, I think it was a way for me to get out of my head, for I discovered that bringing my concentrated attention to things helped to quiet my mind and keep me connected. I discovered that photography could be a kind of meditation, a practice, a way to stay tethered to the world. The summer after graduation, I moved back home and worked with my dad for a while, painting houses in the city and trying to save up a little money. In my off time, I started writing a novel I was sure would make me famous, but it was a bad book, irredeemably bad. And 60 rejections later, I surrendered, and the world was spared. Out of money, I followed my then girlfriend, now wife, up to Santa Rosa, where she landed a good job. I got a job too, at a 1-hour photo lab. This was in the 1990s, and there were still a fair amount of those around. It was a fortuitous event, because looking at people's pictures all day kept photography in the forefront of my mind, and I began to photograph more and more. My favorite place to go was Point Reyes National Seashore, the triangular-shaped peninsula just north of San Francisco. Jutting way out into the ocean, Point Reyes is the edge of the continent, a solemn land that seemed to stand somehow outside of everyday experience, seemingly neither here nor there, but someplace in between, a place apart, and one that drew me in. I roamed there for many years with my camera, trying to do it justice. That's an airplane wheel. I never did find out what happened to the airplane. Tamales Bay. Eventually I came to write a book about it called Elegy from the Edge of a Continent, Photographing Point Reyes, which was published in 2016. Preparing for these presentations always precipitates a pause in my photographing and a taking stock of where I am and where I want to go. No doubt that's another reason why I find them so difficult. But then I think that's why I do it, because I'm scared to, but also because I want to try and better understand my photography and hopefully in the end better understand myself. So in the spirit of exploring new lands, today I'd like to leave Point Reyes behind and share some newer things with you, as well as an ongoing project I'm working on, and also, because you're a captive audience and wouldn't be so rude as to flee, pictures from my summer vacation. Oh, you laugh, but I know you're groaning on the inside. Maybe you should add some wine first. Well, settle in. This summer, my wife and I and our 3 kids went on what we called the Magical Mystery Tour. Our first stop was Peru. We hiked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. We joked to the kids beforehand there would be one of those character-building experiences. It was a dream come true for me. When I was a boy, I wanted to be an archaeologist, like Indiana Jones. I probably saw Raiders of the Lost Ark 15 times in the theater. As it turned out, the kids thrived on the 5-day trail, while my wife and I suffered. The Inca loved their steps, their high stone steps. They built many, many thousands of them, each of which we went up. Days and days of steps. But of course, it was wondrous. Before we left, I swore I wouldn't photograph any llamas. But look at it. How could I resist? And another llama. I like the way the forms of the rump and the rock and the cloud all seem to echo one another. This is another picture I swore I wouldn't make, at least not like everyone else. But when you're standing here, it's impossible not to. And besides, the late light was pretty nice. I desperately wish I could camp at Machu Picchu for a week, just me and my camera. Unfortunately, I don't think that's in the cards. Shifted stones, the main temple, Machu Picchu. The Inca were incredible architects, and a great many of their structures stand just as they were built, despite being in a place where many earthquakes happen. Of course, the centuries do take their toll. I found that one of the unexpected benefits of being a photographer is that it allows me to learn about many different things, if only so that I can title my pictures correctly. Just the other day, I was talking with someone about agricultural equipment, and now Inca architecture. I'm Indiana Jones after all. Well, one can pretend. Temple of the Three Windows, Machu Picchu. These windows are oriented east so that they align with the sunrise. Though it is still the subject of some debate, many believe that the three windows represent the Inca division of the cosmos, the underworld or death, the ordinary material world, and finally the heavenly or spiritual world. Whatever the meaning, you can be sure that the Inca built them with intention. This is not at Machu Picchu, but is part of an Inca citadel near Cusco called Sexe Woman. Some of the largest stones here are over 100 tons. Sexe Woman, and that's how we were taught how to pronounce that. Sexe Woman was the site of an immense battle between the Inca and the Spaniards in the 1500s. I could photograph this sort of thing all day. Just ask my wife and kids. The royal tomb, Machu Picchu. Hiram Bingham, the latter-day discoverer of Machu Picchu, believed that this cave served as a mausoleum for important Inca leaders. This was in Cusco's bustling main square, the Plaza de Armas. You can see a bit of the cathedral behind. There's a famous painting there, representative of what is called the Cusco School, which was a tradition done in the European Renaissance style, but which incorporated local elements in an attempt to convert the native people to Catholicism. The painting is of the Last Supper, with Jesus and his disciples sitting around the usual table, but instead of bread, they're getting ready to feast on a whole roasted guinea pig, head and all. It's worth seeing. Speaking of religion, here's the Peruvian national soccer team. The World Cup was underway while we were there, and it seemed that everywhere we went, in Cusco at least, there was a game on. Although I can't claim to be a huge sports fan, I appreciated how the game became an integral part of the trip, and I have to say, it was a refreshing change from the airwaves back home. Backstreet, Cusco. One of my favorite things to do in the world is to roam a strange city with my camera. It doesn't even matter where. It could be Cusco or Venice or Winnemucca. It makes no difference to me. Of course, if I had to choose, it'd be Winnemucca. This is my late grandma Jenny. The picture was taken by my dad in the 1970s. Why I'm showing you a photo of my grandmother taken by my father. Wow, what happened there? Yeah, spirit of grandma. Why I'm showing you a photo of my grandmother taken by my father will become more clear in a minute. I'm not sure if I even really need to justify it. I think it's a good picture, and she's my grandmother. Plus, she was an amazing woman, raising up 3 kids by herself in San Francisco's Mission District, which was a fairly rough place in the 1940s and 50s. She was tough, but she had a big heart. My grandma Jenny was the one who took me to see the first Star Wars film when it came out. I was 7. At the end of the movie, she turned to me and smiled and said, "Want to see it again?" and we saw it again. Around the same time, she gave me a Reader's Digest coffee table book called The World's Last Mysteries, which described in great detail, with many pictures and illustrations, fabled places like El Dorado and Stonehenge and Machu Picchu and Easter Island. Grandma Jenny planted a seed. We made it, Grandma. Toward the end of her life, no doubt because of my studying philosophy and religion in college, my grandmother started referring to me as the priest. She'd ask my dad, "So how's the priest?" I'm certainly no priest, but if you'll allow me a tiny bit of sermonizing in honor of our grandmothers, I'd like to say that as we never know what the long-term impact of our actions will be, the best thing we can do is to try and just be kind to one another each and every moment. That's the end of my sermon. To tell you the truth, when my wife and I decided to add Easter Island to our trip, we weren't exactly clear of what was involved. We knew that Easter Island was off the coast of South America, which it is, technically, about 2,300 miles off, which puts it roughly halfway to Polynesia. By then, though, we had our hearts set on it, or probably more accurately, I had my heart set on it, and my wife is very understanding, and so we went. The first people to reach Easter Island came from Polynesia sometime between 600 and 900 AD. While the Polynesians were highly skilled seafarers, still the journey must have been an incredibly arduous one. The statue building started not long after and lasted for many centuries, until perhaps the year 1600 or so. The statues are representations of important people who died. They were meant to watch over the village of their descendants and offer protection. Over the years, the statue building became more and more intensive and ambitious, with the statues becoming ever larger and the whole enterprise began to tax the environment. The forests dwindled, resources grew scarce, and the various clans on the island began to war. The first Europeans to arrive in 1721 was a Dutch trader named Jacob Roggeveen. Though Roggeveen and his crew spent only one day ashore, they skirmished with the natives and 14 islanders were killed. It was an ill-omened sign of things to come. When Captain James Cook visited roughly 50 years later, he found a civilization in decline. It seems that there had been terrible fighting during this time. Many of the statues had been thrown over, and people were starving. Peruvian slavers raided Easter Island in the 1860s, taking away up to 1,500 people, including chiefs and elders who carried with them the knowledge of the culture. Many of them died on the journey to Peru. Only 15 ever made it home, and they brought smallpox. At the height of the statue building period, it's estimated that there were 12,000 people living on Easter Island. An 1877 census counted 111 people. On one of our days there, I hiked by myself around the island's north shore. It took about 6 hours, and in that time, the only other living thing I saw were wild horses. The landscape of Easter Island reminded me of pictures I've seen of the Scottish Hebrides, or even of parts of Northern California, of my beloved Point Reyes. It felt somewhat familiar. I'm not sure if they're completely wild, but they're wild enough to at least roam where they want. Easter Island is not just an open-air museum. People live there. 6,000 or so, in fact, most of them in the one town of Hongaroa. Easter Island was annexed by Chile in 1888, and there are still some tensions between the indigenous Rapa Nui people and the mainlanders. In this case, a group of locals claimed that the land on which this hotel was built was taken illegally from their ancestors. The cemetery on Easter Island contains a mix of Christian and Rapa Nui motifs. Though I'm not a churchgoer, really, we attended Sunday Mass at the Catholic Church. The service was given in a mixture of Spanish and Rapa Nui and was very lively, with a lot of singing and a band with ukuleles. There were friendly dogs roaming up and down the aisle. I found a few of these roadside shrines. Moai, Rano, Raraku. Rano Raraku is the quarry where all the statues, the Moai, were carved. It's their birthplace, and there are almost 400 of them still there in various stages of completion. And yes, they do have bodies, at least as far down as their waists. Here they have just been partially buried over the years. After carving, the statues would begin their journey to their final destinations, which were often many miles away. Just how the Moai were moved is still hotly debated. Local legend has it that they walked to their platforms as if by magic, and remarkably enough, archaeologists have recently demonstrated that the Moai may have indeed been engineered to be transported using ropes and a rocking motion in an upright fashion. It seems that with a little help, the statues really can walk. Ahu vai uri. Ahus are the platforms. They are sacred and often filled with human remains. People have asked me what it was like on Easter Island, and honestly, it's a hard question to answer. I found it to be beautiful, but a little eerie as well. The landscape there is stark and dramatic, rolling green hills and black volcanic rocks and dark eucalyptus forests. There are half-feral roaming dogs and screaming roosters, and then, of course, there are the silent and forbidding Moai. It's hard not to think of the island's history when you're there, especially under the gaze of those statues. You can't help but think about what happened. Environmental destruction, starvation, slavery, war, and madness. It strikes you that the story of Easter Island is a story that could happen anywhere. And this knowledge colors your perception of the place. What's it like? Well, that depends on what your mind brings to it. I mentioned the dogs. They're everywhere on Easter Island, and they're incredibly friendly. When we first arrived, we were all delirious from the long journey and went straight to the hotel. Everyone wanted to rest, but how can you possibly rest? We're on Easter Island. So I went out by myself on a walk and was immediately met by a dog, a little shepherd, and she seemed to want me to follow her, and so I did. We took a long, narrow footpath through high, swaying grass toward the sea. She led me straight to this Moai. When we arrived there, she stopped and sat, and at that exact moment, a magnificent frigate bird glided past just above our heads. The dog looked at me then, and though it may have just been my sleep-deprived brain, I swear her eyes said, "Welcome to Easter Island, friend." I love that moment so much. Some of the Moai sported these top knots, which were representations of a hairstyle. I understand that this particular one was hollowed out by a latter-day shepherd as a shelter from the rain. Moai Hina Riru. This is the right of the pair I showed you earlier. Hina Riru is probably the most famous Moai. He's on a lot of postcards. I think the way his head is cocked gives him a certain life. I can hardly tell you what a strange feeling it was to be actually standing here after looking at pictures of it for most of my life. In my head, I kept saying, as if to truly convince myself, I'm on Easter Island. Lone Tree, Mount Taravaka. Mount Taravaka is the highest point in the island. We went on a rainy hike up there. A helpful dog guided us most of the way back down. On the rim of an extinct volcano. Ahu Tahai, Ahu Ko Te Riku. Summer here is winter on Easter Island, and when we were there, the weather was unsettled, with strong winds and frequent torrential downpours. It rained so hard for a few of the days that it was difficult to photograph. It all made for some good clouds, though. I thought these two looked like they were chasing each other. Here are my sons on a hill. It's funny, I traveled thousands of miles to Easter Island, and in the end, some of my favorite pictures were not of the famous statues, but of my children. But that's not really surprising. If I've learned anything from 20 years of taking pictures, it's that the good ones are often not the ones you expected. I think I like these pictures because of the scale. They're my sons, but at this size, they're so small that their identity is concealed, and they become stand-ins for all of us, tiny figures in a vast world. At least that's how I see it. I'd like to think that my pictures are capable of putting certain feelings across. Toppled Moai. The summer wasn't all wine and roses. There were missed flights and unexpected layovers, lost luggage and violent illnesses. And then on Easter Island, again, one of the most isolated places on the planet, a phone call from home, a message relayed from the teenage pet sitter. Our house had flooded, was flooding actually, with water in the finished basement, the basement where I keep my 20 years of prints and negatives, now ankle deep and possibly rising. No one seemed to know for sure. They didn't really want to wade in for fear of electrocuting themselves. We'd have to find a plumber. Now, Hangaroa is a wonderful town, but they don't have stoplights, let alone reliable Wi-Fi. Somehow, though, we managed, or should I say my wife managed. I was way too busy with the business of falling apart. That's not entirely true. I was in shock, for sure, but secretly, there was a part of me that found the idea of everything being destroyed a little thrilling. I mean, how often do you get to start all over at 47? Not that I'd start photography all over. No, I was thinking of a more radical reinvention. I could start writing again. There'd be so much less gear to worry about, let alone carry. All you need to write is a notebook and a couple of pencils and you're good to go. Or else maybe I could finally learn to play that guitar that's been mocking me from the corner of my office for the last 10 years. The freedom. It's possible that this line of thinking was a self-defense mechanism. I'll never know, because it turned out that only the water heater had ruptured. Though the basement suffered some damage, all my work was spared. Oh well, back to the grind. To the old albatross around my neck. Classroom in summer. Here we are back home. I took this through the window of my kids' old elementary school. I liked the light and the shapes, but also the way that it felt intimate and yet contained whole continents, whole planets. Split Tree, Columbia River Gorge. Trees and Fog, Saddle Mountain. On Dog Mountain, Columbia River Gorge. I love the way the wind has shaped these trees like that. Mount Thielsen, Oregon. I've taken up mountain climbing in my middle age because I'm a masochist. Actually, I'm not a real mountain climber, as in a Mount Everest type mountain climber, but I have made it to the top of Mount Hood and Mount Adams, South Sister, and a few others. That's about my level. I try and befriend a peak once a year. I like the getting ready for it, the learning about it, the thinking about it. I like keeping something ahead of me. And I found that mountain climbing, like photography, is a terrific way to still the mind. In either case, it takes some time, but by just walking or just looking, eventually your brain settles back into the present moment, and it's a wonderful feeling. Lancia, Portland. I love photographing cars. I've made hundreds of pictures of cars. Impala, Portland. Mercedes, Portland. I can't help but see this as an elegantly dressed older man, a gentleman, despite his crooked plate. Allstate Plastics, Portland. As you all well know, Portland is changing very rapidly. It seems like whole neighborhoods are disappearing. I know that's the way of things, but I feel sad about this sometimes, and also feel like it's my duty to pull things out of the flow of time and try and honor them before they go. Plus, I love the way the light slants down this street in the late summer afternoons. This is in my neighborhood. I've gotten pretty good about determining when something's time is at hand. It's a pretty safe bet that when they stop bothering to replace the light bulbs, things have reached a terminal state. The Valley Theater is closed now. They're turning it into some kind of gaming center. Here's another one that won't last. Actually, this subject called to me for a few reasons. I like the sort of stage set quality to it, the general mood, the font, and the name. I wonder how many hundreds, if not thousands, of Whispering Pines motels there are in America. That's a book project right there. I also like the psychological murmurings of that lit up no. The motel signs that say simply, sorry, are also my favorites. Another stage set. I like taking pictures in which the subject is outside the frame. You'll have to imagine this motel, and in that way, you become a participant in the making of the photo. It becomes more personal to you. I want to leave some room in my pictures so that you can enter in. See, we'll meet halfway. Evidence, Alameda, California. What happened here? Who did it? It's up to you. Port of Chinook, Washington. Sometimes things grab me from a purely visual standpoint. This reminded me of op art from the 1960s. It almost hurt to look at. If the last one was Bridget Riley, then this is maybe MC Escher. I waited a long time for the van on the overpass to come along. I'm fairly patient that way. I actually like the waiting because it feels more like the moment deeply imprints itself on you. Plus, I've learned over the years that the thing that you so desperately want to happen while waiting on a picture will only happen at the precise moment that you surrender and put your camera away. Telephone pole with tank, Portland. I like how the tank has bent the pole without even touching it, sort of like Einstein's spooky action at a distance. Here's some more spooky action. Shipwreck, Palos River, Washington. This wooden trawler named Hero served for nearly 2 decades as a research vessel in Antarctica. I love photographing shipwrecks, even if they are a little sad. I guess it's an easy metaphor. A thing run aground, a stuck thing, a thing no longer serving its intended purpose. I like windmills without blades, too, and chairs without legs, and cars without wheels, and signs that lead to nowhere. Is there a psychiatrist in the house? Shipwreck, Columbia River, Washington. Ships especially seem to lend themselves to personification. They even have names. Red Eagle, Astoria. John Muir, Astoria. Yaquin, Iwako. Shadow, 9/11 Memorial, New Jersey. What was I thinking here? Maybe that the shadow is like something that's gone missing, or that the shadow is death. Honestly, I don't think too much at all when I'm photographing, only afterward. When I'm photographing, it's much more instinctual. I don't even know what it is I'm looking for, but I do always know it when I see it. When I'm photographing well, I have the uncanny sense that the photographs were already there just waiting for me. They feel predestined. I quiet myself and they appear. It's almost like listening. It's passive like that. I put up my antenna and wait. I recognize a picture right away. I recognize how it feels. A picture has a certain charge. It feels significant. At some point, not so long ago, I began to think that a subject could carry the weight of an emotion or an idea, even if that subject on the surface was not explicitly related to that emotion or idea. I began to think that exterior things could correspond to interior conditions. As to whether or not this is possible to put across, my answer is sometimes. It depends on the person looking at the picture. Repair, Pendleton, Oregon. Gifts, Sutherland, Oregon. Looks so sad. I bring my mind to my looking at things in the world. And in this way, the things of the world really are about me. Sometimes it seems like I'm forever just making mirrors. Is there a way out? Louisiana, 2001. This one goes back a long way for me, but I included it because I think it shows something of the way I work now. I often like to choose subjects or compose subjects so that it seems that things are commenting on each other. I hope that through the composition, the telephone poles and the sky overhead seem connected, and then the picture becomes about more than the telephone poles or sky, but about yearning or feeling small, or with those wires, maybe connectedness. At least that's the way I see it. Fire lookout with burnt trees, Hell's Canyon, Oregon. Steel bridge in the rain. Sorry, I'm losing my voice already. This is a recent one of my favorite Portland bridge. Though I'm a formalist by nature, lately I've been trying to get a little looser with my photography, a little rougher. This is hard for me because for a long time, I tried to emulate guys like Ansel Adams and Edward Weston and Paul Strand, that whole F-64 group where the compositions are always careful and the focus is always sharp and the tonal range is always wide. Though that way of photography is undoubtedly powerful, there are other ways in which to work, other ways to express oneself. Though most of my pictures still fall into that F-64 vein, I guess, I don't want to straitjacket myself by thinking that my pictures have to look one way or the other. So I've been trying to let go a little and let myself be more spontaneous, even if that means the pictures are a little blurry or underexposed. I read once that the great jazz pianist Thelonious Monk would play off notes on purpose, in part out of playfulness, but more because he didn't want to limit himself in his expression, and also because the resolution after those off notes would then sound that much sweeter. I'm no Thelonious Monk, but I want to be able to play the occasional off note without feeling guilty about it. Maybe even make an ugly picture if the spirit moves me. Why limit oneself to some narrow part of the human experience? Muster Station 7, Inside Passage, Alaska. I think it's fair to say that a lot of my pictures have a certain stillness. I like quiet pictures. I like to pull a moment out and sort of suspend it. Chair with fire pit, Portland. This is in my backyard. I forbade the kids from going outside until I could take this picture. Riot police, Portland. I thought the repeating patterns of the armor were interesting and was drawn to all the blackness. On Saddle Mountain, Oregon. Sometimes I get asked why I photograph in black and white, and the question always takes me aback a little, because I don't even think of it like that. Maybe that's because I've been photographing in black and white for so long, they're all just pictures now. I don't see colors when I'm photographing, or maybe I should say I don't think of them. But why black and white? Well, I like the way that black and white photos are accepted as depicting reality, but are at the same time clearly not reality. They have a foot in two worlds. They're in between. And it's in that in-between realm, the realm of ideas and emotions, that I want to operate. That's how I think of it. It doesn't hurt that black and white photographs encourage a metaphorical interpretation of darkness and light. I'm interested in religious symbols of all kinds. For me, they're less about specific faiths than they are a kind of photographic shorthand, a way to get to the questions that all religions are concerned with. Where did I come from? Where am I going? Why am I here? What does it mean to live a good life? How do I live it? Who am I? And are the answers to these questions to be found outside myself or inside myself? Who am I? Here's a picture of my daughter on the porch, taken a few years ago. As I'm sure you've noticed by now, I don't photograph people very often. It sounds strange to say, but I just don't usually consider it. Maybe that's because all my pictures feel very human to me, by which I mean that I feel like they're all about human concerns. But the truth of it is that I purposefully don't usually put my photographer eyes on when I'm with people. I keep photographing and being with people separate. A part of me doesn't really want to look at people with my photographer eyes, because that gaze can be detached, inhuman. There are exceptions, obviously, but I will say that when I photograph people, it's from a different mental place than when I photograph other things. I hold back more. In a certain sense, I think photography can be a kind of violation. I realize that's a strong word, loaded. But what I mean is that when you photograph, you extend your mind into the world and you make your subject what you want it to be, not always allowing it to be what it is. You capture it and transmute it into something else. Maybe there is something to the idea that when you photograph people, you take a little bit of their soul. I guess I would usually just rather leave people alone. But I'm probably thinking too much into it. It could be just that I don't photograph people much because I'm a shy person and find interacting with people hard enough as it is, let alone trying to bring photography into the mix. Photography is a solitary activity for me. How people can photograph and socialize at the same time boggles my mind. When I'm truly focused in on something, everything else, including myself, disappears completely. Here's hope again, the summer in Peru. I couldn't resist putting those two pictures together. I think it was the Buddha that said that the essential characteristic of all phenomenal existence is change, impermanence. Every photograph is an elegy for something that's now gone. And every picture is, at least in part, about death. I found this squirrel in the street in front of my house. It had been hit by a car. I didn't want it to suffer the indignity of being run over again, so I brought it into my backyard to give it a proper burial. I hadn't planned on taking a picture, but when I saw it there in the grave, I knew I had to. I think I probably inherited some of my sensibilities from this man, my father. He was a house painter who in his off time liked to read Kurt Vonnegut and Kafka and Bukowski. Actually, I think he might have been the one who set me on the artistic path in the first place. Once, when I was very small, maybe 4 or 5, my dad took me out into the backyard at night under a sky full of stars. Maybe we lay down in the grass, I don't remember exactly. But I know he pointed up to the sky and carefully guided me to a particular star. And he said, with the utmost gravity, "Son, I have to tell you something." And when you're 4 or 5 and your dad says that, you listen to him. And he said, "Do you see that star?" "Yes." "Well, that's where you're from. You're not from here. You're from there." And that is how I became an alien observer, a perpetual outsider, which is what is required, I think, to be a photographer. I need you to know that my dad's a good man. He just has a funny sense of humor. This is the guy who told me that the reflective bumps on the shoulder of a road were braille for blind drivers. Another picture about death. This was taken in the Palouse area of southeastern Washington. I've gone there 3 years in a row now, always in the dead of winter. I'm planning another trip this January. I think Palouse in Winter will be the title of my next book. There's something about that place that speaks to me, especially in the winter when no one's around and I feel like the last person on earth. The landscape then seems like my landscape, as if it were me, turned inside out. In all the empty space, each thing is elevated. Each thing seems important. It's like the subjects are the pieces of a puzzle I'm supposed to solve. Now, not what is this, but what is its significance? Out in the Palouse, everything is laid bare, and time itself seems to contract, the past and the future collapsing into the present. I opened the closet in this house and it was full of frayed clothes, his and hers, dresses and suits and work jackets. It's my resting section. This was on New Year's Day. There was a sign on the door that read, "Service canceled because of the weather," but I was there. Gas station, Colfax, Washington. Cadillac, Toccoa, Washington. Gas station, Dusty, Washington. Frozen sign, Steptoe Butte. It's a heavy experience photographing out there. It kind of wears me out. I find photographing the abandoned homes especially harder than I used to. On my last trip, I came across one of these houses. It wasn't this one, but it may as well have been. It wasn't so different. I remember the windows were all gone and the wind was up. And when I went in, it was so cold. The inside the same as the outside. The wind was going right through. There wasn't a lot left on the main floor, so I made my way up a set of dark, slanted stairs. There was a door at the top, white and cracked all over like an old painting, with some weak light reaching under it. There was writing on the door, in pencil, done with a careful hand. It read, "Tina's room, no boys allowed." I whispered a quick apology to Tina and went through. The room was empty, except for the frayed scraps of some faded red curtains fluttering a little before a paneless window, and a little round sticker on one wall, a familiar green, a trefoil, a silhouette of 3 stacked profiles, and encircling it, the words, "Once a Girl Scout, always a Girl Scout." I tell you, standing there in that house with no windows, with snowdrift on the floor in Tina's old room, my heart almost broke from the way of things. It's too much. It's personal now. This is my house, my daughter, my fleeting life. I can hardly bear it. But I do. In the Palouse, I work in a frenzy to total exhaustion, just searching and searching all day long, from dawn to dusk, like I'm in some kind of fugue state, like I have nothing to do with it, until I stagger back to my room and collapse on the bed and think, just before sleep comes, what was that? It's hard, but I feel like the difficulty itself is a sign that I'm onto something, that the pictures I'm making out there are meaningful, that they count. It scares me a little, the letting go of myself, but I think maybe the best stuff takes a piece of you. This is another New Year's Day photo. I like it because it's kind of like life condensed into one picture. You can work at the dusty grain elevator, and then when it's your time, you're brought across the street for your eternal rest. I can never pass up a good monolith. This one reminded me of Mecca's Kaaba, the black cube that Muslim pilgrims circumambulate. The sign is asking, I don't know if you can see, do you believe? Sometimes I get the sense that people want me to make more pretty pictures. My mom, while doing her yearly flipping through the Sierra Club calendar, always says, with a hint of wistfulness, you could take pictures like this. To be clear, I have nothing against pretty pictures and would never not take a picture because I thought the subject was too beautiful. But limiting oneself to only seeking beautiful things would be, in my opinion, selling photography short. Photography, like literature or music or painting, is capable of expressing just about anything. And why shouldn't it? Ultimately, isn't the subject life itself? I don't think you can see it here, but all the branches on these poplars were coated in ice. The wind was blowing and the trees were rattling like seed pods or castanets. I know I don't need to tell you how happy I was to find this bus. I titled this exhibition A Beautiful Sadness after a comment that was made once about my pictures. It made me glad, actually, to hear my stuff described that way. Because what I'm trying to do, more than anything, is express, using the things of the world, the feelings that are inside myself. And because we are fellow humans in the world, and fundamentally all made of the same basic stuff, the feelings that are inside you too. I'm trying to reach the universal through the individual. And I'd like to add, even though my pictures might look sad, I am seldom happier than when I'm making them. I struggle to talk about my photography, and often, honestly, to understand it, I get tied in knots. But when I'm out there in the world and I find some treasure that seemed meant for me, in that moment all my questions and doubts are burned away, and it's like paradise, like Eden on earth. I joked at the beginning about this being my last presentation. I'm not sure if that's true. I tell myself that because it helps me get through it. I have been thinking lately, though, of taking a hiatus, not from photographing, but from self-promotion, and especially from social media. I enjoy sharing my work and have met a lot of amazing people online, but, and I realize I probably don't need to tell you this, there is a dark side to it. It can make a person sick, the need for constant validation, the odious comparisons, the self-imposed pressure to keep on producing day after day. Besides fostering narcissism, I think it can make one more fearful of taking risks and stick instead to the safety of doing variations on established themes in some established way. You don't want to let people down. But artistically speaking, that's a bad place to be. It's a dead end. And I feel like there's more in me if I could just work up the courage to let go and tap into it. I was thinking about Sonny Rollins the other day. Rollins is a tenor saxophonist and a jazz legend. In 1959, Sonny Rollins was 28 years old. He had already released 21 acclaimed albums. He was at the top of his game, and then he dropped out. He stopped recording and stopped performing, but he didn't stop playing. Not wanting to disturb his neighbors with his practice, every day Rollins would walk from his place to the middle of the Williamsburg Bridge in Brooklyn. And there, with the trains blasting past and boats below, he'd practiced. He'd practiced for up to 15 hours a day, every day. He did this for 3 years, and then he came back. He made an album called The Bridge. It's a great album. When later asked about his self-imposed sabbatical, Rollins said that he saw John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman coming up, and he thought he'd better, and I quote, get his shit together. Sonny Rollins had a hunger to get better, to be the best that he could be. I'm no Sonny Rollins, but I understand that hunger, that desire to muster one's forces, and I have a deep admiration for monk-like, single-minded devotion. So I'm planning to step back for a bit. I'm going to work on the Palouse book, and I'm going to walk and look and try to become a better photographer. I'm not sure what my pictures will look like, but at the end of my life, I'd like to be able to know that I gave it everything I could. One thing about these presentations is that you never know where they'll lead you. Unexpected ideas present themselves from the most unexpected places. No doubt that's because even if you're not actively working on it, your subconscious mind is still knitting away underneath. I have a friend who's a musician and a writer, and recently on Facebook he's been sharing vignettes about albums that have had an impact on his life. The other day he did one on the singer and songwriter Judy Sill. Judy Sill's music and her short tragic life is another lecture altogether. But I'll just say that after reading about her, I delved a little deeper. I was particularly moved by a live solo recording she did of a song called The Kiss. I am definitely not going to sing for you, but I'd like to share one of the verses. Sun sifting through the gray, enter in, reach me with a ray, silently swooping down just to show me how to give my heart away. When I heard that, I thought, well, that's it. I want to devote myself fully to my photography. I want to become better. I want to learn how to still myself enough to let the light come through. And then I want to give my heart away. Thank you. That was rough. That was rough. They say it gets easier. It doesn't get easier at all. It just gets harder and harder all the time. I'd be happy to answer some questions, but first I'd like to try and sell you some stuff. Promised. The prints in the gallery are for sale. There's a price list out there. I also brought a box of signed Point Reyes books. Elegy from the Edge of a Continent, Photographing Point Reyes, contains 83 photographs, as well as a collection of wide-ranging essays on the peninsula and just about everything else. It's been called a future classic by people that are not even related to me. Because I'm getting tired of looking at them in my office, I'm offering these books today, and only today, for the special low, low price of $20. If you'd like a book but don't have $20, feel free to take one and you can pay me later. Thank you once again for coming. I really appreciate it. Oh, I was going to say, my wife and daughter were kind enough to put together a spread of food out there, some wine and beer, I think. So I hope you'll partake in that with me. God, that was so hard. Thank you. Speaking of fugue states, it's weird. I get this feeling that I'm watching myself from up high, and I'm just going, God, what are you talking about? You're just babbling on. It makes no sense at all. I'm finally able to look up now, and I wanted to look up while I say I really appreciate you guys coming, and thank you very much. It heartens me. I know a lot of you are photographers, and it really heartens me to think of you out there in the world struggling away, probably like me, and trying to do your best. It makes me, gives me courage. Hi.
On behalf of the audience, I want to thank you for having the courage to make this presentation.
Thanks.
I know how hard it is.
Well, thanking.
And I really appreciated your coming out and really bearing your soul.
Well, you're the ones that gave up your Saturday for me, so I appreciate that more. I don't know if I would come for me if it were a situation reverse, but thank you. Yeah, I'm an open book, so if you guys have any questions about anything, I know I didn't talk at all about gear or technique or any of that stuff, and but I'm totally willing to do that if people are interested. Yes.
What are your favorite black and white films right now?
I use Tri-X usually if I'm wandering around, and if I know I'm going to be with a tripod, I like FP4. I don't usually handhold FP4 because it's a little slow and I like to have everything in focus. So that's roughly how I divide it, Tri-X and FP4. Yeah, I do still shoot film, although I'm the last person in the world to get into the whole like digital versus film debate. Like, it doesn't interest me very much. Like, whatever people want to use is fine by me. I see terrible pictures from film. I see amazing pictures from digital. I see, you know, I mean, in my opinion, in the list of attributes that make a good picture, what camera you used is pretty far down the list. I mean, it's not that it doesn't have an effect, it does, but it's not the most important effect, in my opinion. But anyway, I shoot film because I just never stopped. When I started photographing in the 1990s, digital wasn't where it was today, obviously, and I got so used to being in my habits, I never really looked up, and I just kept using film. But that said, like, you know, I like the old rituals. They make me happy. And I do like the simplicity of it, because when I'm photographing, we bought this little camera to take on our vacation, this little digital camera, and I just get completely stupefied with the choices. Like, I don't want to think when I'm photographing, but other people don't have that problem. I think I'm simple-minded, you know, I want to just photograph. So, wow, that was rambling on. Anybody else have any questions? Ryan?
Along those same notes, do you have a preferred format that you really is kind of your go-to?
I've shot a lot of different formats over the years, from 35 millimeter all the way up to 8x10. I think I kind of go back and forth between using a view camera like you do and more like walking around with medium format cameras. I would say the last 7 years or so, it's been mostly medium format, little Fuji rangefinder. I like the walking around and not knowing what I'm going to find. And for me, the small camera works better for that. I just can't imagine carrying a view camera with no particular thing in mind. I like the kind of exploration and, you know, finding these sort of treasures and stuff. But I have I'm very fond of view cameras. And my view camera always calls to me from the closet, like, it's time, you gotta pull this back out and things like that. But it's almost like the way I work, like, I need to know beforehand when I'm gonna photograph for the big camera. So it's like, I wanna photograph this in the morning, and I know it's gonna be this and this, and that's how I work with that, whereas the smaller camera is more just roaming. That was a roundabout way to answer your question, I think, but yeah, back and forth. Yeah, that's kind of a recent thing. Just the last couple of years, I bought a Hasselblad X-Pan, which it's a rangefinder that uses 35 millimeter film, but the negative is about twice as long. It's a neat camera. Like, one thing about it, coming from bigger negatives, I kind of had to get used to things not being as sharp, but part of like what I talked about, like, is just like letting go of the idea that things must be freakishly sharp, you know, like, they don't. You can express yourself if you're okay with expressing yourself in that mode. And the X-Pan is a great camera. It's a great, like, I don't know, spontaneous, like, travel camera and stuff. So I use mostly 6x6 centimeter, I would say, like, about 90% of the time, and then the X-Pan 10% of the time. But I've been thinking about trying to get back to the view camera more. I don't know, just to mix it up a little bit. Yeah. Yes?
Have you ever explored macro photography? Or would that ever interest you?
Well, I'm interested in everything, I think, but no, I don't do a lot of macro photography. And I can't really tell you why that is. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I haven't. I don't know, there's a lot of kind of established habits that I do, and it's hard for me to sort of switch it up and do something different. I wish I were better at that sometimes, exploring new things. I should.
You have a good variety.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I should assign myself, you know, like, just do close-ups or something, and just to kind of stay flexible. I mean, that's one thing I think I like about switching formats and stuff, is I think it keeps you fresh and keeps your eyes kind of open. Like, I'll purposefully just draw with one camera. And so I have to just look at things in that way. Like, I'm only looking for things in that panoramic format, say, or I'm only looking for squares, and then everything else kind of disappears. All my cameras just have one lens. So if I can't back up, then it's not a photograph. Like I just don't see them. I see the ones that will translate. I know photographers, a lot of photographers that don't work like that at all, that carry like 5 cameras around and 10 lenses, and more power to them. Like that's amazing to me. I can't do that. They're like, I'm too, I like to keep things like really simple, like not have choices at all, really. Like I like to narrow it way down. But people are different. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Do you have any rituals as far as how often you get out or locations?
Not as much as I used to. There was a time some years ago where I would go out literally every day and roam every single day. I think honestly, like, I feel like I'm still fumbling around half the time. But I think if you think my pictures are good, I'll put it that way, I think that's when I got better, is when I photograph every single day. I pointed to that, and that was about 15 years after I started, so that was like 2014 maybe. And I'd go out every day, and a lot of times I'd just drive to a neighborhood in Portland, any neighborhood, like it didn't matter at all. And that was part of the, I was going to say game, but that's not the right word. It was part of the joy for me in photography, is going anywhere and then trying to find something. And the amazing thing for me is that you always do, every time. If you give yourself enough time and you clear your head enough, you will find something. And that to me is like, I just live for those moments, like, I just found something in this parking lot. Like, I just knew it would be there. I knew something would be there, and it is. So I think that answered your question. Yeah, I would just sort of drive to a place and stop and walk and walk and walk until all that sort of monkey mind stuff, thinking about whatever, is stilled. And then you start seeing things. And that's what I love. So I don't get out as much as I used to, maybe once or twice a week. And then in the year, I usually have a trip or two of a couple of days that's just dedicated to photography, like the Palouse out in Eastern Washington. So I might be out there for 4 days, and then it's just photography all the time, and it's just by myself, so I'm able to do that. Luckily, I have a really understanding spouse. Shoot, go ahead. I'm not afraid of any questions. Go for it. It's weird. I get more relaxed when I stop reading. Like, I should not read ever again. It's worse because you start fumbling over your words and then you get nervous. And yes.
On my mother's side, there's a long history in the Badlands of Nevada, and I'm curious what your connection is with your photographs in Nevada.
I love Nevada so much. My connection to Nevada. I think the first time I ever really went out to Nevada was, I used to go to the Burning Man Festival a long time ago. I haven't been for many years, but like in the mid-90s I went out there and I just fell in love with that empty space of the Black Rock Desert. Something about all that emptiness, I was just giddy with it. I don't know, it felt like going to another planet. So I went to Burning Man many years, and then I started going there outside of Burning Man, just exploring the desert out there. And so I've gone many times, and I like those little towns like Winnemucca or Lovelock. Or
my mother wants to know if you have any photos of Tonopah.
I love Tonopah. Oh, absolutely. I have many.
Tell her yes?
Yes, I have photos of Tonopah. In fact, I've stayed at the Clown Motel in Tonopah. For those of you who have not been to Tonopah, it's a trip. Lucas knows Tonopah. There's a motel with. I did, yeah. And my friend and I, we got into Tonopah really late at night, and we saw this. It was in the middle of the desert, and this kind of run-down desert town, and then this giant neon clown blinking, the Clown Motel. So we're like, well, that's where we're going to stay, obviously. So we pulled over and went to the Clown Motel, and the lobby was completely full of clowns, and I took the theme the whole way. And what I was going to tell you? Oh, and then so we went to bed later that night, and it was dark. This is the middle of the winter. There's snow everywhere, and I woke up in the morning, And I went out to the balcony of the Clown Motel, and there's the happy clown, still blinking away. And right there, underneath the balcony, is the Tonopah Cemetery, right beneath the. It was just so surreal. But I'm not making fun of Tonopah. I love Tonopah. I love those. I like towns that have evidence of the past. And time seems to move much more slowly in Nevada. And so you get these towns where, you just see all these like layers, these layers of time. And that's what I enjoy. So I don't know if there are any Tonopah pictures on my website, but I tend to put a lot of pictures on Flickr. I use it as a way to organize pictures. So everything's on Flickr. And then it's a little bit more curated for the website. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
How do you find driving around the Palouse in the wintertime?
I have a story about that too. Really difficult, actually, and kind of scary. I have a Subaru Outback, which does well. But one of the first times I went there in the winter, I started driving up this really steep hill, this it wasn't even a secondary road, it was like a third level road. It was all snow, and I went up this hill, and then I just lost traction and sort of started sliding backward. And then I said, okay, I gotta get out of here. I gotta back down this hill, So I started backing down the hill. And what I didn't see was underneath the snow was the side of the road was this just huge ditch. And so the whole car just dropped back into the ditch. So I had, three wheels, kind of two front wheels up and then one wheel in the ditch. And the sun was setting. And this was the first day I had gotten there. I was just like, oh my God. So luckily I had an ice axe with me. So I spent the next 2 hours underneath my car just digging with this ice axe to make a little trail through the berm back onto the road. That's probably been my worst experience, but I have seen lots of cars in the ditch, fully in the ditch out there, and you think you're out in the middle of nowhere and it's just snow to the horizon and it's 8 degrees outside and you see this car abandoned and you're like, wow, where did that person even go? That's terrible. They had to walk 20 miles, so it's very brutal. And actually the driving is not even the worst part, it's the trying to photograph. Because it can be so cold. I remember thinking just pulling over and there's this, abandoned farmhouse or something and thinking okay, I have about 10 minutes before I can't feel my hands and, I just start freezing to death even with gloves. And I find my cameras die out there because the batteries, so I have to put hand warmers in my camera bags to keep my cameras warm. And it's challenging, but I enjoy it. That's the stuff you remember, right? Is all the suffering. It's like when you're camping, you remember, I can't remember who said this, Gary Snyder, the poet maybe, but there's no he said that there's no campsite that I don't remember, and no hotel that I remember, something like that, basically. So as hard as it is to camp somewhere, you remember that spot and all the things that you did, whereas, you're in a hotel and it's just forgotten immediately, but. Yeah. Any other questions, you guys? Whoa, that was good timing. I was so scared of this thing. Oh my God. I was afraid that when I first got here, I got here a little earlier, and the slides started just running away from me automatically. I'm like, no, they can't do that. All right, then. So, Sharon, do you have anything to say, or?
Well, I want to thank you for a most engaging, enlightening, and fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I think we'll have one more round of
applause. Thank you.